Hi guys, Dipi here. I thought it was finally time to make a balanced Druid guide, just because I've been getting so many questions about kind of what to expect and how to play in 9.1, and thought it would be great to just consolidate everything here. So today I'm going to go over just general talents, honor talents, covenants, legendaries depending on what covenant you're playing, soulbinds, gearing and stat priorities, race, some recommended compositions, general playstyle tips, and then also macros. So first, I guess I should probably introduce myself a little bit. I'm a multi-rank 1 Moonkin. I kind of sit at the big Moonkin table. There was some other notable people like Previ and Rudar. So I don't know. I played Moonkin at a pretty high level where it's kind of required different playstyles throughout the years. So I think I have a decent perspective to kind of theorycraft things, and I was one of the people who kind of discovered the prowess of Necrolord in 9.05. So kind of, I guess, kind of blazed some trails there. So maybe I'll have some interesting tidbits. So yeah, that's a bit about me, and I'm also playing in the AWC circuit. So you guys can cheer me on when that happens in August. But yeah, so let's get started with the talents. So this is this first row here. I almost always play Nature's Balance. This just gets a ton of value because to start with, 50 AP just means you can really quickly typically get a root beam go or something and have enough AP to dump some surges. And then also the passive regeneration is pretty great as well. Maybe you're lining or kiting, or the other team is running away, and you're still getting some value by just that passive regeneration. I think Warrior of Elune could have some value hypothetically if you're playing like a very low haste build and it's difficult to enter a lunar eclipse, so the instant starfires could be nice there, but realistically 99% of the time you're going to play Nature's Balance. And then in this next row there's two kind of viable options. There's Renewal and Wild Charge. And 99% of the time I play Wild Charge. I think it's just a lot more dynamic with what you can do with it. And I don't know, I feel like Renewal also is losing a ton of value this patch with all the Maledics as well. So typically Wild Charge you can probably reduce more than... You'll take less damage kiting well with Wild Charge than you will like gaining value from healing with Renewal most of the time. So... but sometimes I will play Renewal. Typically it'll happen if I'm like consistently losing a matchup and I need to theorycraft something and I'm the person who's dying. So this could be good into like a rogue mage or something if they're training you and you need extra heals on the goes. But now this patch that's going to be even more rough because they have the Maledics. They can kind of rotate every go if they're going you. So I think Wild Charge is a pretty good, fun to play and optimal option most of the time. And I pretty much always play Guardian Affinity. I think the Incap Roar is just so powerful. And then also Frenzied Regen, even with the nerfs, is still very, very OP. But the Incap Roar is just totally nuts in almost every matchup. It's just so good to use as like an interrupt, whatever. You can set up clones with it. It typically lasts a second before it breaks on damage. Yeah, Guardian Affinity is almost always what I play. I think Restoaf could have some merit in certain situations. Maybe if you're playing with another wizard and you could do maybe like a Destrolock or something where they're almost guaranteed to go the Warlock, and then you have the Vortex to keep people still. And then here you play Mass Entanglement a lot of the time for setting up your root beams on the enemy healer. And Bash is a really good talent as well. But I play Mass Entanglement just when I know I'm going to get high value from root beams. So that means teams that don't have multiple freedoms for the root beams, like I'll typically play Bash instead of Mass Entangle if it's, I'm fighting like Windwalker DH, and then they have the reverse magic to get out of the beam, and they also have the Tiger's Lust. It's kind of hard to reliably triple CC sometimes and get off the root beams kind of quickly. So into that I might play, if there's double freedoms I might play Bash, but here I'm going to kind of contradict myself a little bit and say that there are times where you play Mass Entangle kind of baseline and you're not intending to actually use it on the enemy healer, and those situations would be like into BM hunters where you can root the pets on one of their goes after they get a trap to like peel, We're also into Windwalker Monks, where you really want to root the Storm, Earth, and Fire images and be saving it for that kind of more defensively. That has more value. And then this row, I almost always play Starlord. I find the haste is super high value and kind of easy to maintain. And then I think Incarn isn't super powerful because you're kind of choosing 10% crit on Incarn over, 4 to 12% haste the entirety of the game. And typically on Incarn, I'd actually rather have the extra 12% haste to kind of quickly spam Star Surges or something. You're more likely you're going to get more globals in. Maybe you can catch people off guard a little bit better. And I just don't think the crit has a ton of value to miss out on this much haste for the entirety of the game. And I guess also from Incarn you get a bit of an extra duration, which I don't think has insane value just because people can typically, they're going to run away after your kind of CC ends with your big Incarn go. So a lot of the time people will, turtle on the Incarn or stuff like that. So you're really getting most of your value from Incarn probably in the first 5 or 10 seconds. So I don't think the extra duration is typically worth it, but this could be insane for like double DPS 2s or something, just where it's going to be up probably the entirety of the game. Yeah. And so this is one of the most straightforward roads right here. You almost always play Twin Moons. Some people thought Stellar Drift might have more value this patch, but I think it's just pretty trash because the only time you're really going to want to be Starfalling is if you're playing Starburst. And then if you're playing Starburst, you have a lot more value from the actual Starburst than the Starfall, and you wouldn't have 100% uptime on Starfall if you're playing the Stellar Drift talent. So I think this is just a no-go. You're going to be playing Twin Moons. It's too valuable. And then this row here just kind of depends on the matchup and what Covenant you're playing. I think Solstice has really high value for if you're playing the Necrolord Covenant and kind of the Rot build with Circle of Life and Death Legendary. And I'll go into Legendaries in a little bit later. So I think you play Solstice if you're playing Necrolord still. It just does so much damage in those matchups. It can sometimes outdo my Star Surge damage over the course of a game, Solstice. But Fury of Elune is really insane if you're playing Kyrian, just because it lines up perfectly with Root Beam and also with the lone empowerment from the Covenant with Kyrian. So you'll play Fury of Elune if you're trying to kill in burst windows typically, and Solstice if you're going more for that Rot playstyle with Necrolord. So that pretty much covers it for the regular talents, and now we're on to the honor talents. I still play Moon Kenora every game. I think just 12% crit for your entire team is pretty nuts. And yeah, I don't know, it just makes Star Surging so good. Starlord and Moon Kenora, it feels nice to be getting that many stats from your Star Surges for sure. And this also is just something that's so powerful for certain specs like LA Shaman now with their new kind of Skybreakers legendary where they get extra value from crit. It kind of resets the cooldown on their Fire LA, I think. So this is just such a powerful talent, specifically if you're playing with certain classes, but pretty much always. And yeah, the other two talents are more variable. This is kind of my go-to melee cleave setup right here, or when I'm fighting a melee cleave, not playing one. The Alkan Adept is a new talent that's super powerful where it just reduces the cast time of your clone by 50% if it procs, and you can have multiple stacks of it. So it doesn't give you instant clones, but you can have 2 stacks of 50% reduced cast on clone, which is pretty insane. It makes it super easy to juke interrupts into melee cleaves. You can get them a lot faster, get the kicks out of the way, and then sometimes you can just cast it and it's too fast they can't even interrupt it. So this actually makes your CC a lot more reliable into melee cleaves, which can really shut you down otherwise. So if there's any chance you're going to get hit, Alkan Adept is just insane, even if you're not fighting a melee cleave too. Just procs from direct damage, not just direct melee damage. So it can be insane I'm typically playing this, 75% of games, if not more. And then Thorns is just really, really insane into melee cleaves. It's really good for kiting hunter pets, a bunch of things because of the slow as well. So this is my typical melee cleave setup. But some other talents I'll play that I'll swap out for are Protector. I think Protector is really, really nuts into Rogue Mage. You can save people on a lot of goes and save a lot of your team's trinkets with, juking a CS and spam casting some massive regrowths on people. So I play this into Rogue Mage typically. And then another talent that's new or not new, but it's got a new partial effect to it. This patch is High Winds. I think this talent can be really insane for dot damage classes because, it can reduce their damage while they're in the clone actually from their dots. But it can just be another thing if you're really needing extra peels, and maybe a team has MS, so you're not going to gain a ton of value from Protector. So say you're fighting a Cleave or something, and you know they're not going to go you, and you're probably not going to proc any Alkin Adept stuff to get the fast clones. You could play this build and just have really powerful peels with clone. Maybe they have an MS, so your Protector heals aren't super worth it. Maybe it's an Assassination Rogue with the new Hemoglobin Sharpen effect, and so your heals are just not going to do anything, so it's better to reduce the damage and then have the Thorns. I could see that being another kind of option. And then the one other talent that I would potentially play is Celestial Guardian into, I think, probably only Rogue Mage and God Comp. I think those are the two comps that are actually best at killing Boomy by far, because they typically, God Comp will always have the Mind Games, Rogue Mage will typically have the Mind Games, and now there's some Maledicts too that just make it really hard for you to kind of use your best defensive, which is the self-healing, and then they also have a lot of spell damage, so that has really high value to those two comps, but I still almost never play it unless I die consistently, and then I kind of reevaluate things. So I kind of go with the YOLO build most of the time until I've died, and then I kind of, just reevaluate it all. So because most teams are kind of melee cleaves right now, this is what I've got out of the gates right now, but obviously Thor's has no value into caster teams, so you can swap that out. Maybe something like this if you want to be a little bit brave and not play Celestial into like a God Comp, whatever. So that kind of does it for honor talents. Well, actually, I'll mention Starburst for a second. I think Starburst is another good YOLO talent, where like if you've kind of, maybe you've lost multiple times to the same team and you need to try something different, I think that's where Starburst really fits in. Because it's really awkward to use. Like you're not even going to be PvPing in my mind if you're playing Starburst, because the entire game you're just running around to pick up these stars, and you're not cloning, you're not casting, your positioning is completely out of whack. Maybe you're running into melee range against a melee cleave, which is like, against the basics of Wizard Cleave 101. You don't want to be kind of in there with the melee cleave if your other caster is getting trained. So this feels really terrible to play in my opinion. It's insane in RBGs, but it just doesn't feel like PvP when you're playing it, so I don't like to play it, but it is good. It does an insane amount of damage, and it's astral damage, so it actually scales with your Incarn and Celestial alignment, and I've been plotting some really overpowered builds for playing on TR with this actually, where it could just like one-shot people, so I think it does have some value, but I don't think you need it to win games, and you can play it if you enjoy it, but I think most of the time it's not typically worth it, especially if you have any desire to actually get better at the game. I think it just promotes a really terrible playstyle, so I wouldn't recommend it, but it's fun at the same time sometimes, so what the heck. So I guess that's honor talents, and the next big thing is covenants. You can see here I'm playing a Kyrian Druid, and I've been pretty successful on Kyrian this patch. I switched one of my 3 Druids to Kyrian just because I had a feeling it was going to be a really fast kind of meta with the armor nerfs and some of the insane buffs to melee classes and people getting MSs left and right and sharpens. So I went Kyrian just to kind of keep up with the burst, and I've been enjoying it. It's been really fun. I actually got over 2400 this week playing Kyrian, so it's definitely effective at the highest level. And I'm pretty sure there's other boomies who could get this too, but I think right now I'm a couple hundred rating above the second highest Moonkin in the world, so that's cool. So Kyrian's definitely viable. Yeah. So Kyrian's good, and typically with the Kyrian playstyle, you're, like I said, always going to play Fury of Elune, and you're just going to set up these big bangs with lone empowerment, and you're just going to have really big 1 minute one shots with the combat meditation, Soulbind as well. So it's kind of a weird playstyle because you're typically kind of peeling between your 1 minute goes more than you are doing really high sustain damage, but you still have decent spread with dots, but it's just not quite as powerful as some of these insane melee cleaves between your goes right now. But the goes are really powerful, and you'll want to save your Fury of Elune to kind of match up with the lone empowerment and just have those big 1 minute goes that typically involve Root Beam as well. So that's kind of the playstyle for Kyrian, and then the legendary you typically want to play as Kyrian is Time Worn Dreambinder, which is just, it affects your Star Surge damage, which is, your big burst spell that is going to be happening when you're popping your cooldown. So, and this gets a lot of value with Fury of Elune too, because you get the extra AP generation in that burst window. So this is the go-to for Kyrian. This is the one I would craft. But Kyrian's also pretty cool because you can play a more sustained spec as well. You can just literally switch to Circle of Life and Death as Kyrian as well, like into Rest or Druids or some team where maybe you can't get a Root Beam because they have multiple freedoms, and it's going to be a longer game, and your sustained damage is going to matter more. So I think Kyrian is really versatile in the way that you can just change your legendaries and really have a very different playstyle pretty quickly. And then if you're playing Circle of Life and Death, like I mentioned earlier, you're pretty much going to want to play Solstice as well. It just, things seem to modify each other, and Shooting Stars just pumps. So I actually would recommend Kyrian to most people because I think it's extremely well-rounded. I think you have really high burst. I think you can still have different playstyles while playing Kyrian. And I think it's just decent for most PvP content. And it's also very, very viable at the highest level, unlike Night Fae. I think Night Fae is really good for, PvE as well, great for RBGs. It's a good time, and you have really high burst damage if you can get off Convoke. But Kyrian has the added bonus of just being viable at the highest level. I think Night Fae I'd recommend to beginners and people playing like under 2400, to be honest, because it's just a good time, and you can win a lot of games really simply by just pressing Convoke, especially if you're playing a comp where the people don't go you. So I think Kyrian's a great overall spec, especially if you intend to play at, or a great overall Covenant, especially if you intend to play at higher ratings as well, just because you can swap legendaries in and out and adopt very different play styles. But I think Night Fae is probably my recommended for beginners. And then I think Necro has a ton of merit if it's kind of a slower meta where you're seeing a lot of Resto Druids and hybrids, and and for Necrolord you're always going to want to play Circle of Life and Death for the most part, unless you know you can only kill in burst windows, and in that case it just feels pretty shitty to be a Necrolord Druid in general. So yeah, that's kind of the Covenant overview. For Kyrian you play Time Worn Dreambinder. For Necrolord you'll want to play Circle most games. And then for Night Fae, I think you're going to want to play the new Convoke Legendary, which will be available to the masses tomorrow, and we'll see just how insane that is. It's possible Convoke is, Night Fae gains some more value and traction at the highest level tomorrow, Tuesday, as this kind of gets explored more. But yeah, I think Kyrian's a great overall pick, and I think Night Fae's a great overall pick. I know Necrolord was really successful at the highest level last patch, but I wouldn't really recommend it to beginners just because you lose a lot of burst damage. And I don't know, I think it's a very fast-paced game right now. It'll slow down as the patch goes on, but also I think the lower-rated games tend to be a lot faster than the higher-rated games. So yeah, that's my Covenant overview. And then Soulbinds for Kyrian. I almost always play Pelagos. I mean, I'd consider playing Mechanicos, Mekanikos, however you say it, into like Rogue Mage if I was consistently dying, but for the most part, 99% of the time I play Pelagos just for the extra burst. That's really why you're playing Kyrian. Yeah, and for my potency conduits, I really like this one for the extra duration of Celestial Alignment. Seems to get a lot of value in PvP, just that burst damage is key, and also as Kyrian you might want more mastery, so you're just getting a lot more from your incarns. So and this is by far the best endurance conduit. Just the auto proc is so powerful, although you really will want to have a cancel aura macro to get rid of the frenzied regen buff if you get mind games or something. So, and I really like this conduit as well. This is technically the highest simming conduit in PvE, and then it also just, it affects your Star Surge damage, quite frankly, so I think it gains a lot of value on your burst windows as well. Yeah, the best finesse conduit we have by far is Tireless Pursuit. Just really, really overpowered for kiting, to be honest. And yeah, in terms of like second options for endurance conduits, I think Innate Resolve is really good for kind of burst healing. But then if you know they're not going you sometimes, like this new condensed Animosphere can be really powerful as well. It can just heal through dots pretty easily on you if you're not the main target, and then your healer just doesn't have to worry about you even less. So I think that's another new one that's kind of entered the conversation in 9.1. And actually my third potency conduit is this one, which it's another thing that's going to affect your burst windows just because you can have this extra int proc on your burst damage. And I think like the other decent options for potency would be like Umbral Intensity, which adds 0 value to your burst damage. You're not casting Wraths or Starfires on your burst damage. So I typically like these three as Kyrian for the potency. Yeah, and Kyrian looks like it'll be pretty poner with this this newfound resolve thing. You can kind of wait for that to happen and then incarn and just probably delete somebody. So excited to try that. Excuse me. Yeah, and these two new paths here both look interesting. This would be another extra, peppering onto your one shot potentially. So it seems good to be adding that if you're just really going for that Zerg one shot. And this seems like it could have some pretty good value if they're going you as well, like in a rogue mage or something where you're going to be getting stunned on cooldown, and hopefully you live the stun and get the actual benefit from that. So that's kind of my Kyrian overview, I guess, with the Soulbinds. I think playing Mechanicos or whatever could be valuable as well with the Sparkling Drift Globe into like a rogue mage or a cleave, but I wouldn't recommend it until you die just multiple times playing Pelagos. I think it's better to have the offensive pressure, but this could be something to consider if you're dying consistently. Yeah, and the autofile can actually be pretty sketchy into rogue mage if you get mind gamed, because then you're gonna have your auto frenzy and that and just get totally one shot. So depending on what you're playing, you'll move this around to potentially avoid that. Yeah, I think you typically won't be playing clamps. This is kind of better for healers, I think. And this would be the one that would be more likely to save you. So that would be the little bit of merit to playing Mechanicos, but just keep it simple and play Pelagos, to be honest. Then I'll show you guys my Necrolord Druid Soulbinds. Alrighty. So 90% of the time I play Bonesmith on Necrolord. I think the extra int is pretty insane. And then this crit buff is really nuts as well. You can actually stack this up in the gates by playing Protector for the auto crit, and you can get this up to like 9 stacks in the gate, or you typically don't want 9 because you don't want to accidentally proc it too soon, but you can get like, 6, 7, 8 stacks of this, and then pretty quickly proc this on your first go, and incarn with the extra 18% crit, which I think is really insane. And then also Bonesmith next week will be getting Carver's Eye, which seems very, very nuts and easy to maintain as a moonkin if you're multi-dotting. So I think this is going to be the go-to kind of damage soulbind for Necrolord most likely. But it's possible. We'll see how much damage things like Kevin's Oozling really do. I'm not entirely sure what to expect, and there's more to be tested, and I'm planning to upload some more videos kind of as the season continues with the just the realities of how everything's scaling and just once we've tested more. So but I think I'm playing Bonesmith 99% of games, and if I die, I'll play Plague Divisor. I think Plague Divisor is another thing that's good into Rogue Mage or God Comp, something that's going to go you. Unfortunately, this frictionless coding got nerfed, or maybe fortunately for the overall sake of the game. So it's not quite as valuable up here, but you still get the ultimate form, which is insanely powerful into God Comp specifically, just because they only have one interrupt. So if you just cast a clone on the go, they're going you and get CS, you can bust out a Fleshcraft and pretty reliably live a lot of the time into God Comp just because they only have one CS. So this is something I really mostly consider for God Comp, but also for Rogue Mage if you're dying consistently. This doesn't look too attractive. I mean, people can just move out of it. I don't know, it can only proc once a minute. Doesn't look too insane. This is something, but probably not going to really break the game very much. And I think Carver's Eye is just really what's going to be nuts for Moonkin. You'll probably have quite a few stacks of that reliably, just with how easy it is to dot the entire enemy team and their pets. So I'll play this most of the time until I die, and then I'll consider Plague Divisor. That's kind of how I see it. And in terms of like what your picks are for finesse and endurance, it's the exact same thing as Kyrian that I already mentioned. But for the potency, it's also pretty much probably the same thing. I'm not a huge fan of the Evolved Swarm Conduit. I kind of prefer the Precise Alignment, Free of the Skies. Then I think the better third talent would actually be the what's it called? The new Armor Fragment one. Yeah, this one, compared to the Adaptive Swarm one that can just get dispelled and just a little bit less reliable. And this is insane uptime. It looks pretty broken. So yeah. And unfortunately, I don't have a Night Fae Druid to show you guys the Night Fae Soulbinds on an actual character, but it's the same thing for endurance and for finesse. And then instead of your first priority for the potency conduits for Night Fae is it's the one that affects the convoke damage. It does like 25% more convoke damage. So you basically just play that. You play Naya, which is the first slot to get the extra mastery when you convoke for the big one shot, and you take as many potencies as you can, and that's pretty much the gist of it. So yeah, that's Soulbinds. For gearing, what I've done is you want to get at least 30% versatility. That is just by far the best stat with the two-piece from the PvP trinkets. After 30%, it kind of loses a little bit of value because there's DRs after 30% with stats now. You just get increasingly less value. So after 30%, I like to kind of put a little more into haste, but this patch, we'll see how much stat values we really end up with. But and if the game is fast, I think versatility gains a lot of value with the damage decrease as well. So verse is definitely your first priority, at least until it starts to really DR. And I think it doesn't DR too terribly until about 40%, honestly. So we might just go verse until then, but at least until 30%, you want to just all in on verse. And then after verse, your second best stat is definitely haste. So that means getting haste verse on as many pieces as you can. And then after those two stats, I think mastery is really powerful for Moonkin compared to crit. So if you can't get a piece that has haste verse, go for verse mast. Yeah, and that's pretty much the same thing for Kyrian, although for Kyrian I'm pretty excited to try like a 0 haste build with like a melee DPS, so you can play Alkan Adept and have it reliably proc, and you won't need as much haste to clone, and then you can play full verse mastery and just like one-tap people. That sounds fun to me, so I'll play that on TR, but that would suck to get a whole nother set unless you're a huge nerd who loves to PvE. So yeah, that's basically the stat priorities. It's verse until it DRs heavily, then you get some more haste, and then mastery, and then lastly crit. So yeah, that's the stat priorities. And then for race, I really like Tauren if you're Horde. I think War Stomp is really nuts. The extra HP is not to be kind of forgotten about either because Frenzy scales with HP. There's a few things that scale with HP, so that's actually not a bad thing either. This does decent damage. You've got your Moonkin Aura as well. But the big thing is really War Stomp. War Stomp's insane into cleaves. You can stun both DPS and get off a clone on one of the DPS to peel, or maybe the healer if they're close. Then I also really like War Stomp into Rogue Mage, actually. There's a lot of times where I'll disorient the mage on their combust on their opener or something, and they'll trinket the disorient right away, and then I can War Stomp clone them, and I don't even have to waste my bash or. Yeah, it's nice. So I think War Stomp has really insane value for the Horde. And then for Alliance, you'll definitely want to be Night Elf. Night Elf is super nuts right now because you can actually Shadow Meld the Maledics once they're channeled. So you could kind of deal with 2 Maledics compared to 1 much more effectively on your own. You could dispel, the first one on you and then Shadow Meld the second one. And that's going to be one of the big weaknesses of Moonkin this patch, is dealing with Maledics because you can't Frenzy. So I think Night Elf is going to have really insane value there. Yeah, so that's pretty much it for race. Night Elf if you're Alliance, Tauren if you're Horde. The comps I would recommend, I did really well as Moonkin Warrior last night. I think that's a really powerful comp into Cleaves, just because you've got the Intervene, and now I think Moonkin does really well with the melee DPS with the Alkin Adept, because you'll typically be the one getting trained, and you'll get a lot of these procs, so that'll be really nuts. So I really like Moonkin Warrior. I think Moonkin Ellie is really going to be super insane this patch, specifically as the patch kind of goes on. I think Ellie gets a ton of value from Moonkin Aura, and I think specifically for that comp, you're actually going to want to be Necrolord and playing Circle of Life and Death, and then have the Ellie playing the Skybreaker's Fiery Demise, I think, the Flame Shock Legendary. And your sustained damage is going to just be at like such an insane kind of amount. I think it's going to overwhelm a ton of people. And I think if the meta slows down, that'll be a really nuts comp. So yeah, Moonkin Warrior, Moonkin Ellie, Moonkin Shadow Priests I've been pretty successful as this patch as well. I think that's going to keep being really good. I think Moonkin DH could be very interesting as well. Yeah, I think those are probably the main ones. Boomy War, Boomy SP, Boomy Ellie, and Boomy DH. That'll be kind of on my radar, but I'm going to keep trying things. I'm curious to try LSD2 with a Warlock and a couple of things. So, and I'll provide some more information on what I'm having success as I kind of play the game a little bit more. So yeah, stay tuned for that. And yeah, I wanted to touch a little bit on general playstyle. I've kind of alluded to this a bit throughout this commentary, but for Kyrian, you really want to do your big 1 minute goes with Fury of Elune, Lone Empowerment, Root Beam, and so you want to focus well on like kind of your burst windows and setting up CC to align with your burst windows, and then you want to be typically cloning enemy offensive cooldowns, just something that's really high value to do. You can off heal really well, especially if you're protector of the Grove. Yeah, so I'll make another video kind of going in more depth about how to just kind of general offensive and defensive playstyle into specific matchups, and hoping to do some commentary videos on just specific matchups where I'll get more into specific playstyle. But if you can focus on just bursting really well and like bark skinning before you die, you'll get a decent amount of rating. If you can just learn to really set up your burst, I think that's probably the most important thing. And then after that, it's learning how to kite effectively while being in line of your healer a little bit, and playing defensive well. But I think the first thing to really practice that's going to win you games is just bursting. So that'll probably be with Kyrian or with Night Fae. So that's kind of what I would recommend. Yeah. So I'll go more into depth with that in a different video. And the last thing I wanted to touch on was macros. You typically just want to have, I like 1, 2, 3 macros, like cast at Arena 1, cast at Arena 2, cast at Arena 3. And I have that with my Solar Beam and with my clones. Just because you clone so much during the game, it's kind of nice to just have it in one bind, and just to do it immediately on whoever you want it on without having to target anybody. But I also have clone at target and clone at focus. And then I have beam 1, 2, 3. I think that can just be really high value, like out of stealth if you need to kick something, or the enemy team comes right out of stealth and you don't want to spend the finger global, like putting someone on focus and then beaming them. Like it's super high value to have like a 1, 2, 3 kick to just like immediately blast someone out of stealth. That's been a situation where I've really wanted that macro. So, but yeah, I've got focus binds for root, for most of your CC spells, you want to focus bind, and then for some of them that you press more consistently, I'd recommend 1, 2, 3, but you don't have to have the macros for that. And then I off heal so much that I have a macro for healing each party member. And then something I have on my Necrolord Druid is just a macro to cast Adaptive Swarm on myself, and I have it in my bear form, so it's like right here is where it would be. And it just, because Adaptive Swarm actually affects your Frenzied Regeneration ticks, so it's really good to swarm yourself in Frenzy if you're getting destroyed and it's up. So that's another good macro. Hibernate, Focus Hibernate. I think that's pretty much it. So yeah. Well, thanks for watching the video. Sorry, this is a pretty raw video. I've gotta learn some editing skills, but that's on the to-do list. So if you enjoyed this, give me a thumbs up, and I'd love to have some comments about what other kind of content you guys would like to see. So I'll take it seriously what you put in the comments, and it's totally possible I make a video addressing something that's in the comments. So so thanks a lot for watching, and hope to see you in the next video. Thanks.